Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be wrapping up our thoughts on the 2024 NFL Draft before we get into some of these player profiles, because I do want to do more research into some of these guys. As you can see here, there's quite a few of them I didn't even have on my big board. Actually, the vast majority of the draft class was like that, so I'm going to do my film evaluation on those guys, be able to give you guys some better thoughts, but it is time, I think, for us to talk about generally, like, how did the Jaguars do in the draft? You know, how are these players going to fit in Jacksonville? And just what do I actually think about all this? And so we'll go pick by pick, and then I'll kind of give my overview of every pick from, you know, the 3 days. So the first one today was actually at the end of the day, if you just go off my big board, this would be the second best player they drafted. It's Javon Foster, who's an offensive tackle out of Missouri. I was a huge fan of Javon Foster. He wasn't my guy very early in the process. However, as time went on, I don't know if it was really soured on him, but he just sort of fell down my board. And I think some of that honestly ends up being seeing the same name over and over. But Javon Foster, he graded out really well at Missouri. We'll actually look at this on PFF just to give you guys an idea. If you're just going off PFF, you're going to think this guy's awesome. He graded in the 80s in everything this last year. Consistently has improved throughout his career. Has a lot of experience in college. But when I watched him, I thought, like, this kind of pick, if Jacksonville wants to go get him, which I thought he was a pretty good fit for them, he would be the ideal swing tackle of the future. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that Javon Foster is the Cam Robinson replacement and that we've got our guy of the future. I don't think that will be the case. It's always possible, and you hope it is, because that means more value, and that's what you want out of the draft. But I do think at the end of the day that Javon Foster will be a guy who sticks around here. He's not going to be someone who's getting cut. He's going to be here for at least those 4 years as a really good swing tackle, which you look at this roster, Jacksonville is one tackle before this pick going into 2025. They got Anton Harrison and Cam Robinson and Walker Little are both walking after this year as of now. So I thought it was a really good pick. I thought they got great value out of it. I actually expected him to maybe go third round before this, maybe to a team like Kansas City. They would make a lot of sense. They ended up getting their guy earlier. Maybe that caused them to fall down the board a bit. But I do like the pick a lot for Jacksonville. Probably my favorite of all the picks outside of Brian Thomas Jr. And then you go to Jordan Jefferson, who, honestly, like, I didn't scout him a ton. Didn't really watch him a whole lot. But he is a bigger defensive tackle. Also coming out of LSU, it's another pick from that school. I think you gotta expect those guys are pretty comfortable coming into Jacksonville with a lot of their teammates. So, you know, they gotta love it, especially like Mason Smith, who's already got a lot of people surrounding him here that are going to be able to help him out at the next level. But Jordan Jefferson, he was someone who graded out all right from my evaluation of him through PFF. And at the end of the day, like, not someone who's going to blow me away, but I do think he could be someone they develop over time and can have at least as maybe a rotational piece on the interior. So, you know, there's a lot of pieces there. I think you talk about Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton. Now you got Roy Robertson Harris behind that still. You have Mason Smith, Tyler Lacey, and Jordan Jefferson. That's 6 players we're talking about. I think these investments could very well spell the end for Roy Robertson Harris, who he can play a little bit of defensive end too. He did line up inside more in 2023 though. So I think at the end of the day, this is probably his last year in Jacksonville with 2 relatively early picks going towards the defensive line and having the pick on Tyler Lacey last year. Now at 153, they made a pretty good pick here, getting DeAndre Prince out of Ole Miss. This was someone they were connected to in the pre-draft process, so it's not shocking that Jacksonville picked them. I thought he might fall farther down the board, and he could have been available maybe at 236, Not really shocked, though. It's day 3, and I thought Prince could be someone who could potentially start for Jacksonville if they needed him to. Now, would I think that's ideal? I look at him as more of maybe a backup cornerback to start. I think he's going to be probably, gosh, he might be CB5 talking about outside corners, because you have Campbell, you have Darby, you have Jerrion Jones now, you had Monteric Brown already, and then now you've got Prince coming in, who I think will have to wrestle that role away from Monteric Brown. So there's a lot of outside corners. It's just a question of, like, do you want to have a bunch of guys who are all right, or maybe like, average backups, which we'll see what they become, right? But that's where they are right now in their career, and they have to develop from that. Or do you want to go out and get a great cornerback? And that's where I think it's kind of a weird position to evaluate now, because there's all these players invested in, and I don't think you're going to carry 6 outside cornerbacks on your roster. So I think it's a good value. Like, I think we'll call it average as far as like where he was drafted, although he did say he was expecting to go 4th round. So maybe they did get a steal, just maybe not according to what I thought was going to happen. So it's an all right pick. I'm just going to be interested to see how things work as far as the outside cornerbacks go. Now, the end of the draft, I actually liked 2 of these picks. The one that I'll just be straight with you guys, I don't have an evaluation of him because I've never even heard of the guy. Keelan Robinson, running back out of Texas. This was a backup. Apparently, he's played a bit as a special teamer. He's been a return man. And so maybe he's the backup to Devin Duvernay, but kind of just an oddball pick. You got this selection moving back, trying to get Brian Thomas Jr. still. And it's important to note, of the 3 extra picks you got, this was the least valuable. But when you're spending picks on players like this in the 150s and the 160s, it's hard to justify taking the chance on your first pick. And this is a part of that evaluation. We'll see what Jacksonville does with the 3rd and 4th from Minnesota next year. They should have a really good opportunity there. Now, I don't really trust them, honestly, after day 1. I don't think they've earned the trust there based off their recent track record and how, like, rookie seasons have gone, second years have gone for some of these players, and I hope they prove me wrong, right? But this was just a weird pick. Not one that I think is going to have any impact at all. You've got 3 running backs already. This guy is probably just a special teamer for Jacksonville, and it might just be the next Snoop Connor pick, but we'll have to see what happens. But to wrap it up, I actually love the selections here, and I know they're not on my big board. None of these were on my big board, starting with Jordan Jefferson. But Cam Little, he was one of the best kickers out of this class. He's a young guy. He's got a powerful leg. I remember watching videos on like the form of some of these kickers, trying to learn what I could, because I thought, well, I might as well know. Jacksonville's probably going to invest in one. Cam Little was one of the guys who was talked about as being the best in that regard. So there's a ton to work with. He's super young, and I think that he's going to be probably the long-term starter for Jacksonville. I think they might have actually locked down that position here. I have a lot of confidence in him being the kicker, and they got in just in time after seeing Reichard and Carty go off the board, which I think for me, the rankings were probably Carty, Reichard, and then Little. And there's not much difference, right? Because it's hard to predict what's going to happen with kickers. I think they took a really good shot on one, though. He's got a powerful leg. He's got good accuracy. And so what can he be? Well, a very good kicker for Jacksonville. So I love that pick. I think they did a great job there. And then 236, this might be the most Trent Baalke pick ever. They pick Miles Cole, outside linebacker out of Texas Tech. Now, what you got to know about Miles Cole is essentially this. I won't go too into details, but he is basically a physical and athletic freak out of Texas Tech that never produced at any kind of respectable level in college football. anything that's going to get you to be, maybe a day 2 pick at most. He just never got there. And he's not young. He's not 21 years old. Like, I think he's around 24. I think he's played 6 seasons of college football. So he's been there for a very long time. And he has not made that leap like a lot of people would have expected by now. So you get to this point, and it's like, for me, when I'm scouting those guys, I don't know if I would really even spend the pick, honestly. But I think overall it can end up being okay. It's not a massive use of capital. And what's the upside, right? Well, he has very few limitations. He could be really good. So I guess that's possible. Do I think that's going to happen? No. I mean, I'm just going to be straight about it. I hope it does. I hope I'm wrong. But this is a pick that is completely about upside and nothing else at all. So I respect it at 236. That's fine. It's 7th round. Those are the kind of picks you can make there because you're not going to get starters. Like, when I was looking at the board, and this is the list of players who are available, there are a couple I would have taken over, Miles Cole, for example, but there's not a ton of guys I loved. Like, I mean, Michael Pratt and Leonard Taylor, absolutely. Like, people I'm going to like. Cornelius Johnson, you can even throw on there too. Once you get down here, when I get into like my 110s and my 120s this year, these are prospects I'm not really a huge fan of. I just left them on there because I thought they were going to get drafted, and I thought they were good enough for that. So if I was Jacksonville, like, I would have probably swung for the backup quarterback or swung for the upside of a defensive tackle like Leonard Taylor, who could have gone first round this last year. Jacksonville chose not to, and that's what they do. But were there just a plethora of better options? No, I wouldn't say that. I do think there were ones that were miles better than Miles Cole, but I just think there were too few to really go after the team too much, especially when they kept Beathard under contract. They've got Mac Jones coming in, and then you look at defensive tackle, they just took Jordan Jefferson as well. And with how, Leonard Taylor played this last year, I don't blame him a ton for overlooking him, because for me, like, Leonard Taylor, and obviously he didn't end up with the same grade as Mason Smith for me, but they're very similar prospects. Guys who were supposed to have first round potential this year that did not break out. I think the difference for Jacksonville was that they know why Mason Smith didn't break out, and they have the best situation to let him break out at the next level. That's the major difference. So that's how I'm looking at that. I'm okay with the Miles Cole pick. There's players I obviously wish we got, but it's fine. And you needed another pass rusher as well, may I say. So I still think they got to add there. I would be exploring the trade market. I mean, you look at the depth right now, and it's really just not that great. You can look at the depth chart here, and this does not have Miles Cole factored in right now. But when you look at the roster, your pass rushers on the outside, Trevis Gibson, you can throw Roy Robertson Harris out there, and you got your Yasir Abdullah. It's okay, but these are guys I want to be the fourth guy, right? Like, I want a third guy who has potential in there. And I know technically you say, well, Miles Cole is a player that has potential, but I want someone who I know is going to produce a little bit already. I don't think Miles Cole's ready for that. So that's still a need for me. The interior of the defensive line, I think, is good at this point. They had some pieces before. They've thrown more in. Mason Smith, I think, can make a bit of an impact as a rotational guy to start. You see where he goes from there. The rest of the defense, I think maybe cornerback could be an issue. I don't know if it is, though. Because if Ronald Darby gets hurt or Tyson Campbell gets hurt, well, Jerrion Jones can come in. You've got him now. Monteric Brown's a good fourth guy. DeAndre Prince is there. It's not elite play, but you've got enough guys in that room. So maybe that's something you're looking at more next season in the draft if you have a cornerback you love. On offense, I think the offensive line could have used more depth. I am not comfortable having no backup at guard or center, really. I guess I got to throw in Tyler Shatley on here because he did get re-signed, I believe. But that's not really doing it for me. Like, I think they got to do a little bit more on the interior and the long-term plan. Like, you get to next offseason, just to give you guys an idea what that looks like, you would have on your team, the only guy that is a backup is Luke Fortner. You have Anton, Ezra, Mitch, and then Cooper Hodges and Javon Foster. They're going to have to add a lot of pieces next offseason on the offensive line. You look at wide receiver, if they don't cut Zay Jones, I think it's a great room. And I think the starters are really nice. I do like what they've done there. I do think if you want to criticize it at all, you can say maybe Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis are very similar players right now. By the time that Brian Thomas Jr. develops, he's going to be a different player. He's going to be a more well-rounded player. He's going to run more routes. He's going to be better at that. I believe in him being able to develop. And I think if I'm going to talk about what I think Brian Thomas Jr.'s like rookie contract could look like, I think it's similar to CeeDee Lamb's, maybe not with the same high-end outcome, but in the sense that he's not this incredible player the first year. He's still good, right? But he's continuing to get better, continuing to develop, and there's that big breakout, maybe in year 2, year 3 of that contract. But behind that, I think Zay Jones probably should not be under contract. It's $8 million for a backup. I think I would call that gross negligence, if I'm being honest. And to not have Brian Thomas Jr. start would also be gross negligence if you're arguing Zay Jones is a starter. Tim Jones as well doesn't really do it for me. You know, I'm fine with him as one of the last guys. I just think they should have done more, maybe to add another wide receiver in there. And outside of that, like, that's probably all I can go after. But I do like everything else they've done for the most part. They generally did all right this draft. My disappointment is probably the fact that when you look at, like, my rankings, you look at this, at least from my perspective, you know, I tried scouting from end of July, early August, all the way up to now. They did not manage to take a single player outside of Brian Thomas Jr. that I thought was a starter at the next level for sure. Not a single one. That's my frustration. Because last year, even as bad as the draft was, and, you know, you have your good picks in there. I'm not going to throw them out too. Like, I think Anton Harrison's great. I think Antonio Johnson was a phenomenal pick. I think Tyler Lacey could be fine. Parker Washington at 185 was good. There's other picks that were just like, what are you doing? Right? That draft was made up for by the late hits on guys like Antonio Johnson and Parker Washington. This year, sure, like, I think you're going to get your kicker of the future. I don't know if any of these other picks are really hits. I think Javon Foster is fine. Like, I think he'll be the swing tackle, and that'll be great, right? That's not tremendous value. That's a solid pick. And that's why I'm a fan of it. But it just felt like they reached so far down my board for many of these guys. I can see the potential, but they got to get there, right? And it's a thing time's just going to tell whether this was a good draft class or not. I love what, like, Mason Smith and Jerryon Jones have said, their interviews, all that stuff seems great. They just were not guys that when I watched them, I thought should be going that high. I hope I'm wrong. I'm going to reevaluate them, and I might tell you I'm wrong when I do the film breakdowns on them. That is very possible because both players were not guys at the top of the list of who I spent the most time on. But if I'm just going to talk about what I really wish they did better, I just feel like in a potentially, like, elite draft of players, talking about all these prospects that came out into the 2024 NFL draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars might have come out with a very weak draft class. That is a possible outcome, and I don't think there's any denying that. I hope it's not true, but there's the possibility. Last year when they made bad picks, I justified it to you guys. I think I even gave them an A as far as the grade. I don't want to lie to you guys this year. It could be good, it could be bad, but understand this was not a home run draft based off the initial evaluations of these players. They have to go earn it. You can give them all time. There's a lot of players who are going to develop, who are going to need to get better. We'll see how it is in a few years. But just keep that in mind. Have a little bit of patience with this draft. I don't think all these players are coming out and blowing your socks off the first year. Maybe Brian Thomas Jr. does. That's probably the only one. Other than, I guess, Cam Little, of course. I think he's going to be a good kicker. But those are my thoughts to wrap up the 2024 draft. We'll get into some of the prospect profiles, hopefully this next week. I will probably not have a video up maybe for a couple days just because it's been a really busy last week. And so I'm kind of tired from it, and I'm out of town right now anyway. Gonna have to travel back. We got finals coming up, a lot of things going on. I'm hoping to still have some stuff out next week, but that's my goal. Start looking into the prospects then. And then once we look into the prospects, I think it's time to put a bow on this off season, give the final grades, and start to give you thoughts on how I think they're going to do in the 2024 NFL season. So thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's been a great draft cycle. I've had a blast being able to scout these players, go out and see them in person, and to finally finish this process for the first time. It's an incredible feeling to be able to do that. So thank you guys for being a part of that, for supporting as well. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Enjoy everything that comes from the 2024 NFL draft. And finally, go Jags.